Welcome to the Peaceful Parenting Podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Rosensweet, mom of 3 young people, peaceful parenting coach, and your cheerleader and guide on all things parenting. Each week, we'll cover the tools, strategies, and support you need to end the yelling and power struggles and encourage your kids to listen and cooperate so that you can enjoy your family time. I'm happy to say we have a great relationship with our 3 kids. The teen years have been easy and joyful, not because we're special unicorns, but because my kids were raised with peaceful parenting. I've also helped so many parents just like you stop struggling and enjoy their kids again. I'm excited to be here with you today and bring you the insight and information you need to make your parenting journey a little more peaceful. Let's dive into this week's conversation. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Peaceful Parenting Podcast. Today's episode is an interview with a guest expert, Jack Hughes. Jack is a parent tech support expert. He's 18 and he was that kid who found a way to get past all of the parental controls that his parents tried to set up, including what he told me in the interview, setting up cameras in the room behind his parents' back so he could see what the passwords were that they entered in. He overcame his issues with screens, and you'll hear about what changed things for him in this interview. And he started a business to help parents get their phones and monitoring systems set up and to help parents understand all the loopholes that kids will try to do to get around screen limits and screen monitoring. This was a great conversation, partly because it was actually, even though Jack's only 18, some of the things he said about what would have been helpful for him were so in line with what we teach in peaceful parenting. And also because he gave us a good roadmap for what we should do to set up for best practices, as well as some things that we can do if our kids already are having a hard time managing their screen time. If you like this episode, be sure to share it with a friend. Be sure also that you are following the podcast. Just hit follow on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. If you would, while you're there, leave us a 5-star rating. And if you would be so kind to take a couple of minutes and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, we would really appreciate it. And it really helps the show and helps us. All right, let's meet Jack. Hi, Jack. Welcome to the podcast.
Hello. Thanks for having me on today.
Yeah, I'm excited. This is something that I get questions about all the time. So it's really great to have an expert to talk to. And I just wanted to say right off the bat, I've been getting your newsletters, and you had one that was a parent's guide to teen slang. I knew all the slang,
hmm
Jack. I knew all the things on your list. I was feeling very proud of myself.
You passed the
I
test.
did. I passed the test. All right. So why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Okay. So my name is Jack Hughes, and I grew up in this age of digital devices, the age of iPhones, MacBooks, and all sorts of Instagram and social medias. So I have a lot of firsthand experience of what it's like to be a kid growing up in this age. And my parents would give me devices and they would want to protect me from all the harms online, whether that's pornography, whether that's cyberbullying or whatever it could be. They wanted to install parental controls, or they did install parental controls on my devices, whether that was an iPhone or an iPad. But I would always figure out ways around those parental controls, the little loopholes that I would do. And so I was kind of like I like to say the prisoner knows more about the prison than the
Nice.
prison warden.
Yeah.
So I decided when I became an adult, when I'm 18, as I am right now, that I'm going to help parents set up parental controls for their kids so that their kids won't be able to do exactly what I did as a kid,
Yeah.
if that makes sense.
No, that's great. I mean, I remember my daughter telling me that a friend of hers had her mom had parental controls, and she said, "Oh, but she figured out a way to get the password." And I was like, "How'd she do that?" She said, "Oh, she put screen record on her phone and then hand it to her mom and say, 'Can I just have 5 more minutes?'" And of course, it recorded her
hmm
mom entering the password or the code, and then she had the code and her mom didn't know it. I was like, "Oh, that's clever."
Yeah,
Like,
I would
yeah.
even do strategies like set a camera behind the person onto the screen. Like it was like really intense stuff, kind of
Yeah,
like
like
Mission
almost like a
Impossible.
yeah, I was gonna say like a safe cracker or something like that.
hmm
Okay, so what do your parents need to know? I mean, what do you think the biggest things are that parents need to know about protecting their kids? And I think you mostly work on Apple devices, but I'm
hmm
assuming that there are some strategies that are just general good practice strategies for parents across all sorts of devices.
Yeah. So I mainly work on Apple devices just because I think it's like 80% of kids, at least in America, use Apple devices. So that's where most of my focus is. But Android devices are actually, you can lock them down better than you can
Okay.
iPhone devices. And I'd say the main things that parents should know is, I'd say going off number one is parents should know that parental controls, if you install them, your child is not 100% safe.
Yeah.
As in, like, don't blindly trust these parental controls because a lot of parents don't know how to correctly set them up. A lot of parental controls, especially the ones on Apple devices like screen time, are not that intuitive at all.
Mhm.
And there are ways that kids will figure out little loopholes that kids will figure out around those parental controls. But if you know how to set them up correctly and if you are educated in that, then they can be a very effective tool. And I'd say number two is make sure parents are monitoring what their child is doing on their phone. So don't be breathing down their neck. Don't be constantly looking at all their text messages or whatnot, but just having a general sense, knowing what apps they're using, knowing what platforms they're on or what games they're playing. A lot of that can do wonders for protecting children online.
I love that you have said that it's not all about just trying to block the screen time or do those parental controls, that you still have to be involved and know what your
Yeah.
kid is up to. Because you're right, it's not like a fail proof. Like if you teach your kid to swim, you're still going to watch them while they're swimming because there's still things that can happen, that could be unsafe, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you teach them about stranger danger, what a good analogy I like using is it's like a seatbelt, right? Parental controls are like a seatbelt. It's a good layer of protection, but if you're, driving recklessly or if you get in a really serious car crash, a seatbelt might not be enough to protect
Right.
you.
Yeah. It's not like set it and forget it. Speaking of layers of control, one of your recent emails, you talked about the 5 layers of control. Can you go over what those are?
Yeah, so it's one of my favorite strategies that I call layering. And essentially what it is, it's layering different layers of parental controls on top of each other. So I recommend installing parental controls on the Wi-Fi router, on the cellular service plan. A lot of cellular service plans allow parental controls, and then installing first-party parental controls. So these are the parental controls built into iPhones and Androids. For iPhones, that would be Apple Screen Time. For Androids, that would be Google Family Link. And then I also recommend installing, which would be the fourth layer, or was that is that the fifth layer? One of the two. And that would be installing third-party parental controls. So that would be services like Bark or like Quizno,
Like a
and these are extra
monitoring
layers.
monitoring
Yeah,
systems, yeah. Yeah.
yeah, and then finally going to the individual apps and also turning on the parental control. So apps like TikTok, apps like Instagram, even Snapchat, even though theirs is pretty bad, Roblox, they all have built-in controls for their services, also installing those. And the reason why that strategy is so effective is if you figure out a way around one parental controls, there's going to be four other layers preventing you. So you're not just adding protection, it's more compounding,
Mhm.
if that makes sense.
Mhm. So I'm thinking of 2 reasons why parents might want to, why they wanna control their kids' screen use. I mean, one is just time spent, right? Like, that's what my daughter had a 2-hour time limit on her phone, which I just set through, the iPhone parental controls, where she, YouTube, Instagram, Snapchat, like, all of that stuff, she only had 2 hours a day, but she was actually willing. Like, she wasn't fighting me on it, and I don't think she ever figured out any loopholes because she recognized that
Mhm.
the time that she didn't wanna spend more than 2 hours a day, like, scrolling TikTok is like, whatever. So there's like that, time spent that we don't want our kids to just be screen zombies and be on their phones all day long, but then there's also safety, which is sort of some of the things that you've been referencing. Are there any other reasons you see that parents are interested in, like, monitoring or controlling their kids' screen usage?
Yeah, so there's a lot of stuff to do with addiction.
Mm,
So, like, Instagram, I don't know if I've read the book, or if you read the book, The Anxious Generation.
I've listened to
I
a
can't
couple
remember
interviews with the author, but I haven't read it, yeah.
Yeah, he gives a whole big talk about how as soon as smartphones came onto the scenes in teenagers, there was a sharp raise in anxiety.
Mm,
So it's just a lot of negative correlation that we have with teens and phones, and Instagram or just social media in general can cause a lot of body image issues, a lot of comparisons, unhealthy comparisons, a lot of gives kids a lot of sense of FOMO or fear of missing out because they see their friends are having fun and they're not having fun.
Mhm.
I myself have been a lot of have been victim of that FOMO, that unhealthy comparison. It's not just, the mental health issues. There's, as you just mentioned earlier, there's a protection. There's online predators.
Right.
I think at any given moment, the FBI or estimates that there are 500,000 predators online right now,
Wow.
which is a crazy big number.
Mhm.
So there's online predators, there's that aspect. There's you can even find drugs on certain social media sites like Snapchat or whatnot.
Was there anything, like, looking back, it sounds like it was kind of, like, just how you described it was almost like a battle, like, your parents wanted to limit your screen time and protect you, and you wanted to get as much screen time as possible and get
Hmm.
into sites that you didn't want to get into. Looking back, was there anything that your parents could have done that would have helped you that wasn't having to do with limiting your screen? Do you know what I'm saying? Like, was there anything, like, relationally or teaching wise that you could save other parents from not doing the things that your parents didn't do? And I'm not saying I don't wanna throw your parents under the bus, but, like, hindsight is 20/20, right?
Yeah, so I definitely I see where you're going with that. I think a lot of times my parents would just set it and forget it. We never talked about it. I think if they did communicate with me, it would have been a lot better. It seemed more like I was pitted against them than us working together, essentially. So if they're able to talk to me and like, here we want to do this for you. They didn't really have any conversations with me. It was
Mhm.
more, you get this iPhone and there's restrictions on it and you can't go on this site or that site or whatever it could be. Yeah, if we had healthy communication, I think if we instead of me against them, it was more us against the world, if that
Right,
makes
yeah,
sense.
that does make sense. Do you think that there's a good age where kids should get our first phone?
I'd say a good age for phone itself. It depends on what the kid is doing and how mature they are.
Mhm.
If let's say they're walking to school alone and you want to have a phone up, you want them to be able to call you, then younger would be better. But having that phone locked down from a lot of online dangers like social media, so they can't install social media, so they can't, have addictive games or whatnot on there. But then I'd say later on when they're 16 would be a good age to start allowing social media. I just I don't feel good recommending social media for anyone under 16 because there's so many negatives and
Yeah,
not enough positives to outweigh that. Um, but it depends on what's on the phone. It's not just give them the phone.
right.
So yeah,
I think if even if you had a younger kid and you wanted communication, there are other things. I mean, you would know better than I do, but they're like dumb phones too, right? And also
flip
like,
phones.
yeah, the ways that someone could call without having a smartphone that has the ability to have apps on it.
Yeah,
Yeah. No, okay. I want to ask you another question about privacy. Because so my thing with my kids was I didn't even know their passwords on their phones. And my husband and my thing was, you get privacy until you give us a reason not to trust you. Like if we find out you're bullying somebody or, doing things you shouldn't be doing on your phone, then we will, check your phone or consider checking your phone or whatever. Because I really didn't feel like I mean, I could picture when I was a teenager, if I thought that my mom could open if I didn't have a phone, obviously, because it was the '80s, but, if I were a teenager today and the way that I communicated with my friends and, chats and whatever were on my phone, I wouldn't want my parents to have unlimited access to looking at my conversations with my friends. It would be like they were in the room while we are talking all the time. So, that's one thing, I feel very conflicted about parental controls. I mean, sorry, I don't feel conflicted about parental controls. I feel conflicted about parents having access to teenagers' phones. What do you think about that, and how do you square that with phone checking, or do you even recommend phone checking?
I think your thought on checking them once they give you a reason to check it. I don't think I said that as eloquently as you did, but I think it's a great rule of thumb to have. I mean, you don't want to be as parents, you don't want to be control freaks and constantly be snatching their phone and looking at stuff. Again, yeah, I can totally imagine how, as a kid today, how invasive that would be. And that would make me hate my
Mhm.
parents if they would always do that. And that again pits me against them. And that
Yeah.
one, it makes me rebel more, which kind of has the opposite effect. So
Right.
yeah, your thought on that is a great idea, and I haven't given a whole lot of thought on when you should do phone checks and whatnot.
And I'm just remembering as you're talking that another thing we said was if we were really worried about you, like if we thought you were in danger or,
Hmm.
worried about like self-harm or, anything like that, then we would reserve the right to look at your phone. We never had to. And, not, I think that I think it all worked out well, but I think that just how you said it was actually quite good. I won't check your phone unless you give me a reason to, right?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, totally agree.
So, another thing I was thinking about in terms of parental control and monitoring is that it's okay if you get your permit for driving, you are like driving for first, you can't drive, right? Because you're too young and you can't drive, and your parents drive you everywhere. And then you start learning how to drive, and your parents are, in the passenger seat while you're practicing and learning. And then you get your own driver's license. How do you see that process happening with technology, with devices? Because it seems like it would be a bad idea. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like it would be a bad idea to be like, okay, you're totally controlled and limited and you can't visit any of these sites. And then when you're 18, you're moving out and there's like, you're on your own. So how do you
Yeah.
provide that? How do you suggest that parents provide a scaffolding for their kids to help teach them about, about what's out there, about managing themselves on their devices?
Yeah, that's a great point that you brought up. I've seen a few people who had very strict parents growing up. They weren't allowed to have any outside communication. And then as soon as they went to college, they had their phones completely unlocked and they never built up those skills to resist, or they never had the education to just know how to navigate the online world or how to resist addiction on social media or whatnot, whatever that could be. So it's a great idea to slowly roll out and expose children to what's out there. As you're saying, of course, at a controlled manner that they're mature about, or controlled for their maturity level. Hold on, I had a thought here. Yeah, sort of like driver's license, where you don't give a 15-year-old their full license just yet. You give them a permit first. So slowly matching out, slowly rolling out different things. So maybe when they're 14 years old, you allow them to have YouTube Kids on their phone, and then when they're 15, you allow them to have Facebook, and then 16, oh, it's a big age. You can drive now. You can have Instagram and you can have Snapchat, or maybe not Snapchat, TikTok or something like that.
Interesting you say maybe not Snapchat. Why that? Why do you say that?
Snapchat is, of all the social medias, Snapchat can have the most harms to it, just because a lot of it is disappearing messages.
Mhm.
There's a lot of drug dealers in Snapchat. I mean, the app was originally designed for sexting, so that's a big function of the app. It's just disappearing. A lot of bad stuff goes down on Snapchat. I think Snapchat gets a really bad rap compared to other social media sites. I would even argue from my personal experience, that Instagram is worse than Snapchat, just
Okay.
because the stuff I've seen on Instagram outweighs Snapchat. But there are like porn stars on Snapchat marketing for their OnlyFans and whatnot. So
Right.
Snapchat's definitely very
There's
bad
probably bad
itself.
stuff everywhere depending.
Yeah. You can find it on YouTube, you can
Yeah.
find it on Discord or whatever it could be.
Yeah.
Roblox even.
Yeah. I mean, I think like just a key theme that keeps coming up is like open communication, right? And one thing that we do in peaceful parenting is I don't know how familiar you are with peaceful parenting, which is what I practice and teach, is we don't do punishments. So, that's not to say that, say your kid was using their phone inappropriately and like cyberbullying someone. It's not to say that you wouldn't take their phone away because you feel that they're not, or take their phone away while you work on what's going on because they were, it's a limit that you might set to prevent harm from being done. But we don't take away phones because like, oh, you didn't clean your room, so taking your phone away, or you made some mistakes, whatever. So we're taking your phone away. And what I have found just anecdotally is that kids who aren't punished are much more open, have much more open communication with their parents because they're not afraid of getting in trouble, right? So if you had somebody like some of the saddest stories I've heard, I'll just say like trigger warning here, but some of the saddest stories I've heard with like teen suicide are kids who were, they sent some pictures to somebody and then that person's holding it over their head and said they're going to tell their family. And instead of going to their family and saying like, "Oh, look, this happened," like cuz they're afraid of getting in trouble, right? So, I don't know exactly. I think I lost my train of thought of exactly why I was telling you that. Oh, open communication. So, but I do hear that as a thread for you, that you think that would have helped you and that you think that's an important part of helping kids with screen use is just really keeping the lines of communication open.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I mean, to a smaller extent, I have seen I had a friend who had a really big struggle with a pornography addiction, and he kept it to himself for years. He never wanted to tell his parents because he was afraid.
Mhm.
And eventually, when he finally did, and they were able to start having communication, is when he really started getting better. So, open communication is definitely a major factor and a great thing for
Yeah.
raising kids.
Yeah, and not using punishment makes it so that you your parents are the first people you go to instead of trying to hide it so you don't get in trouble. And I think that's what we need with the technology, right? Like that you have a if you have an issue, you want your kids to come to you and say, "I have this issue. I have this thing that happened or
Hmm.
this thing that's happening to me." In terms of one thing I hear a lot from parents is, "Well, I'm on board with limiting my kids' time on the device or not letting them have these apps until they're 16." But they always say it's not fair and that none of their friends this isn't happening with any of their friends. How do you counsel parents when their teens or kids are giving them pushback about limits that the parents are setting? Or what would have been helpful for you if you were in that position? You can take it from either or both angles.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I mean, it's that classic old adage: if like all your friends are jumping off the cliff, would you jump off the cliff yourself? Now, I would always say, how high is the cliff and what's at the bottom? But I mean, as a parent, if you, I guess a way you can help mitigate that would be to show your children the harms and the stories and what you know about the negatives of social media or of these certain apps. That way they can, you give them all the facts and you kind of, I don't want to say convince them to be to your side, but kind of give them your side of the story. Cause a lot of times kids will just hear the fun stuff. They'll just hear what their friends are doing and they'll see their parents are saying, no, you can't have this. And they don't give their children a good reason.
So
If parents, again, have open communication and kind of share, um, why,
yeah, so
essentially
trying to
why.
help them understand why they're not getting Facebook or whatever. It's funny because I was gonna ask you what you thought of the legislation that went down in Australia. I think it was Australia where they kids under 16 aren't allowed to have social media apps. And if you thought that was a good idea, but you did say that you thought social media at 16 was good. So you
Yeah,
think that's a
I think it's
good.
a good idea.
Yeah. It's interesting, my daughter where we live in Ontario, this year they passed a new thing that phones aren't allowed in the classroom. They have to be put out of sight and away in the classroom, and unless the teacher specifically says, like, "Everybody pull out your phone so you can use your calculator," or whatever, but it's a new province-wide rule, and my daughter, I mentioned she's in grade 12, she came home after the first week, and she was like, "Mom, you know how they are doing the no phones in the classroom thing?" And I said, "Yeah, what do you think?" And she's like, "I love it. It's so great." Because she said everyone's actually talking to each other and people are like,
That's really
if they
good.
don't have anything to do, they're like doodling on their paper or whatever. But I think that one thing that parents sometimes forget is that sometimes it is a relief to, as my daughter said, like it's nice that people are talking to each other again.
Yeah, yeah, humans are meant to be social creatures. We need to have real connection with people, not just on virtual text messages or virtual AIs or whatever it could be. Real life, people to people communication and contact is very important. I think it's very healthy. It's great that that law came down in that
Yeah.
province.
Yeah, no, it's so great. It should have been a long time ago, I think, but, it's amazing how there was actually parent pushback for it because 'cause they're like, I wanna be able to talk to my child whenever I want throughout the day," and it's like, back in the old days, you used to just call the school secretary and get a message to your kid, right?
Yeah, that's one of my other points I often talk about is parents who just put up restrictions and nothing else is not that wouldn't be the best idea. Another good idea for parents is also to facilitate children to be children. So if you like block, I'm talking more younger kids, if you block their ability to have unlimited screen time, also facilitate them and allow them to have fun in the park or
Mhm.
maybe hang out with friends. It's like replacing I don't wanna call it bad habits or the screen time with actual playtime
Right.
for kids, like how you grew up as a child.
Mhm.
Like, my fondest memories growing up was not watching YouTube till 2 a.m. It was going outside in the woods, building forts with my friends. Just
Yeah.
like that part is incredibly important.
Yeah. I mean, and that's tough too, isn't it, Jack? Because there's so many, like, I hear this from parents too, like, well, I limit my kids' screen time, but nobody else is limiting their kids' screen time, and then there's nobody
Yeah.
to play with, right? Do you hear that a lot from parents?
Um, I do, and I also see that a lot as a kid
Mhm.
who grew up. I remember I went like my school, there were like, I don't know, 50 kids, and like me, my brother, and my friend, my best friend at the time, we were like the only ones that would go play in the woods. Everyone else would be inside playing video games,
Yeah.
which is sad.
I'm actually really worried. I've said this to a bunch of people. I'm, like, super worried about this screen time experiment that we're all living through right now. You know, I live right next to a really big, beautiful public park, and I see people walking with their kids in wagons or strollers with iPads in their hands or iPhones, and I'm like, "Oh my gosh, they're not, like, looking around at and interacting with people and looking at the birds and whatever," and I worry about it. Like, I sound like such a old lady, but, you know, I do worry about how focused on screens not only kids are, but people are in general these days and what we're missing, right? Because I don't think screens are bad, like, I love a good
Hmm.
15 minutes scrolling Instagram and seeing, like, recipes and funny baby videos or whatever, just like anybody, but, you know, I do it for too long and I'm just like, "Ugh, that feels gross."
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
Mhm.
Screens are tools, just like anything in life. They're like eating, right? You eat too much food, it gets unhealthy, and a dose of real life is very important.
Yeah. Yeah, just on the lines of, you know, kids wishing there was somebody to play with, maybe parents listening to this could band together with some, you know, of their friends, of their kids' friends' parents, and everybody make an agreement, like, we're all gonna limit screen time, or we're gonna, you know, we're not gonna get smartphones until a certain age, and then their kids won't be alone in it.
Yeah, yeah, we're gonna have family game nights, and we're gonna have invite friends over,
Yeah.
play poker or Catan or something like that, or go out in the woods.
Mhm.
Great idea. Yeah.
What about if you somebody is listening to this and they're already kind of the horse is out of the barn and their kids already maybe, like, really addicted to their phone, you know, they get really upset if the parent starts talking about putting restrictions on time or apps or whatever, monitoring. What advice do you have for those parents if they're not, you know, a lot of people on my podcast have younger kids, so this is gonna be helpful prevention for them. But if they're already there and their kid is already like, "I can't live without my phone," where do you suggest they start and what can parents do?
It's a very tough position to be in. I bet I guess there are 2 ways of attack you can look at that problem. You can try to facilitate other means of, like, ways they can spend their time that they also enjoy. So, let's say they're instead of watching instead of having screen time for hours a day, maybe they also enjoy art. So, really facilitating art, bring them to art club, and then at the same time, or the other vein of attack, slowly start putting restrictions and kind of weaning off their dependency on their phone because it is sort of like an addiction.
Mhm.
Just like it's not a good idea if you just completely go cold turkey. Kid might hate you.
Yeah.
There's also like slowly weaning off their dependency on their phone, but also you can also really facilitate other passions that they like. Like for example, when I was, I think it was like eighth, or was it? It was like 10th grade where I was heavily dependent, not heavily dependent. I was big into watching YouTube videos and binging YouTube videos, and I couldn't get any of my schoolwork done. And what I did was I found a passion where I built a motorcycle out of a old bicycle and an engine I bought off Amazon.
Cool.
And then I completely forgot about YouTube and binging YouTube, and I spent all my time on that, and that really helped me get out of that zone. So
Yeah.
stuff like that
Trying to
parents can
replace
do.
it. That's what so do you know The Healthy Gamer, Dr. K? Do you know who he is? He's
No.
somebody you might wanna check out. He's up your alley with talking about video game and screen addiction. But he was on my podcast, we'll link to that in the show notes, but he was talking about if you have a kid who has screen addiction, look at what the screen's taking the place of, you know, connection or a hobby, like you said, right? Like when you got a hobby, something building this motorcycle, that took the place of, in a healthy way, of the screens that was filling they were filling a need, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's a helpful way to think about it too. Like if you have a teenager or a kid who's addicted to screens, what need is it filling? What is it giving them? Because addiction always serves some sort of purpose, right? And so just thinking about how can we, like you said, how can you what they're getting from the substitute for what they're getting from the screen and something that's a little bit more well-rounded and rewarding, really.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea. I haven't thought about it that deeply before, but yeah, I totally agree with what you're saying. Find the underlying cause. I guess for me, the thing that addiction was satisfying was just mere entertainment. But
Mhm.
some people, it may be connection. And so
Yeah, boredom,
connecting, we
like you
try to
were
solve that.
maybe bored and it was interesting stuff, and then you found another thing that would be interesting for you to do.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah,
Yep. That's
yeah.
exactly what happened.
So it's interesting that newly come out of this world almost that we're talking about, like the kids who just wanna be on screens all the time. What was it for you? Like, how did you make this transition from a kid whose parents had to, like who you were battling with your parents to get more screen time, to somebody who's trying to help other parents not have kids have as much screen time?
Yeah. So I was 17 years old. No, I was years old at the time, 16 and a half, around that range. And I kind of got to observe really firsthand a close relative of mine who started with screens. I don't want to sound like this is some common thing, but he went from screens to substances and he had a lot of huge mess and a whole train wreck.
Mhm.
And I kind of saw that firsthand. And then all my time of me on screens also and pornography and going behind my parents' back all came to surface then. And there was this big, huge, dramatic turning point in my life where I kind of finally had communication with my parents and I finally talked with him. And then eventually one thing led to another. I wanted to start a business and I found out, wait a minute, this is a great opportunity because I have this experience of getting around controls and I have all this experience with setting up controls for my younger siblings
Mhm.
nowadays.
Oh, yeah, your
That
parents have you as, like, an in-house advisor now. Do
exactly,
they
yeah.
pay you, or do you just call it work experience?
Sadly not, but I've had a few aunts and uncles pay me, which also gave me the idea to start doing this.
Okay, cool, cool. Well, we'll
So
definitely put all your contact information in the show notes for people to look you up and reach out to you if they need to hire someone. Um, there was something else I did think of. I keep thinking I should write these things down when I'm thinking of them when you're talking. Okay, so last question. When kids are primarily socializing online, do you have any advice for parents of, like, how to help them? Like, what would have been well, maybe socializing wasn't your thing online, but any ways to help facilitate, since you are technically still a teenager, how to facilitate shifting from, like, that online screen-based conversation to, connection to in person?
yeah, so I do a fair bit of teaching when it comes to online communication, and there are a few cons to online communication. I believe it's like only 7% of what we communicate is actually our words. The
Mhm.
rest is tone, inflection, all that sort of stuff. And just talking online cuts out all of that 93% of communication. So educating kids that there can be a lot of misunderstandings when it comes to online communication. A big thing that I've found with online communication is it's very easy to be confident online because you're not in person,
Mhm.
especially in terms of relationships. So, like, when I was 15, I liked this one girl and I was able to tell her or talk with her and flirt with her on the text. But when I would see her in person, I wouldn't have any confidence because it was in person and I would be kind of a coward. And so, really facilitating kids to view online communication as a tool and not a replacement for in-person
And she
communication,
was
if that
probably
makes
like, "What the
sense.
heck? Does he like me or not? Like, can I,
Exactly.
chat
And
with him
then
online? He seems like he likes me. I see him in person and he won't even talk to me."
exactly what happened. Yep.
Yeah. Very confusing. I mean, it's confusing already enough being a teenager without having to add in all of this stuff. I think that people have pointed out the sort of pros of social media and helping kids who are otherwise marginalized find their communities and support. And there also are a lot of cons, I think, that life was, life was simpler when you didn't have to navigate having your mistakes or embarrassing moments be amplified by social
Yeah, that's another
media
thing.
or people
And it's there
talking about
forever
you.
too.
Yeah, yeah. So, well, thank you so much for this. Anything that you want to leave our parents with? Any, you know, big I think I already asked you about biggest mistakes, but any other things that you see that you wish parents knew about their kids and screens and tech that we haven't talked about?
How about this? I'll share my probably the most used loopholes that kids will use,
Great.
and that is something that I call the Google sign-in backdoor.
Okay.
A lot of times parents will remove the web browsers off their kid's phone. So for me, that was my parents removed Safari because I had an Apple phone and they made sure I didn't have Google Chrome. And so they thought that there's no way I can access the internet. There's no way I can access YouTube or Instagram.com.
Mhm.
So they removed the web browser. But what I found out is that you could open up a little mini web browser inside of an app using like the Google sign in feature on a lot of apps. And then I can access the web browser. So it's blocking the phone's ability to use the internet from the root, not just deleting the web browsers. So
Right.
that's something I can cover later. And I have a guide that also explains that if parents want to check that
All right,
out.
send me the if you send me the sign in for that, the opt-in page for that, I'll include it and parents can get that download. That's very helpful. And I did read that in one of your newsletters that I was like, I didn't even know about that. I'm lucky my kids weren't that devious. Okay, so I there's a question I ask all my guests but most of them already have children. So I'm adjusting this slightly for you. If you do have children one day, what's something that you want your future self to remember about being a kid or having kids? Like if you could send a message to yourself, say you're 30, you just had your first kid. If you could send a message to yourself, what would you want yourself to know?
I'd say be patient and try to see it from your children's point of view, not the parent's point of view, because I've sort of experienced a little bit of that with my little siblings. I have little siblings who are 10 years old down to 7 years old. So looking at it from their perspective, why do they want social media? And that can help facilitate communication or that can help with setting up good controls or whatnot.
Well, and even in general, I mean, that's one of the things we teach in peaceful parenting is to try to see things from your kid's point of view. Because most of the time we're just seeing things from our own adult point of view, and our agendas can be completely different. And, what matters to them might not matter to us, and vice versa. So I love that. You're going to be an awesome, peaceful parent. And like, make sure to reach out at that day if you want any more peaceful parenting information.
Thank you.
And so tell our listeners the best place to go to find out more about you and what you do.
Yeah, so I have a website called parenttech.support. There you can sign up for my newsletter, which will give you that guide that I mentioned earlier. It's a little PDF download. It's pretty quick and gives a rough summary of screen time. And then you also be subscribed to my newsletter. And then if you want to take that a step further, if you really want to, you can work with me directly and I can help you personally set up parental controls and you'll be opted into my anytime tech support program where you can text me and I'll email you or send you a text message as soon as possible with help.
Like a
Essentially.
911, Jack
Yeah.
911. My kid figured out
Yep.
a loophole that we didn't think about. That's awesome. I'm sure there are a lot of parents out there who will be happy to use your services because, there's a lot of people they don't even know how their own phones work, right? Yeah. Thanks,
Yeah.
Jack.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode. I hope you found this conversation insightful and exactly what you needed in this moment. Be sure to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast platform and leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. Remember that I'm rooting for you. I see you out there showing up for your kids and doing the best you can. Sending hugs over the airwaves today. Hang in there. You've got this.